Now clap. Now lean. Now clap. Now clap. Now lean.
We are what we are.
We're what we are.
Let's
Chaotic.
Go. Let's go.
All right now.
Chaotic as ever.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I am doing well.
Oh, wonderful.
It's episode 5.
It's very much episode 5.
And the show is called Rigor and Flow.
The show where business meets love.
And culture meets critique.
Yeah.
Okay, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about all things money. Some people love that conversation. I like that where you were going there with that song.
Like it?
Yeah. Some people are very uncomfortable about talking about money.
Especially in the UK.
True.
Why do you think people are uncomfortable about talking about money in the UK, do you think?
I'm not sure it's confined to the UK. I think it's in a lot of places. Maybe more so here. I don't really know. Mm-hmm. But money is really just about money. It's a deeply emotive topic. Mm-hmm. It brings up all sorts of stuff for us. It's deeply embedded in, I guess, our early years and how we were raised and whether there was an abundance of it or what was happening in the social climate and the political climate that impacted our lives. There's a lot around money that's not just money. It's psychology, really, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
And I guess ultimately, when I think about money, hearing you say what you've just said, you know, in a way, money is more of a belief system. Like we all have to agree that that piece of paper in our hand has value, because otherwise it falls apart. Because if I were to take that piece of money to, I don't know, someone on an island somewhere and said, here's £5, give me your last remaining meal. Yeah. You're going to be like, I don't think so. Yeah. Suddenly it loses its value, right? Yeah. And that belief system. So,
which is why a lot of people say money is a construct.
It's a construct.
It's an idea we make up and give it its value and its meaning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so today we're going to dig deep into the layers of our scripts that we grew up with and what we were taught about money. And then ultimately how we have developed from that point, but then how we have combined in our relationship and what our way of dealing with money is and what new scripts we're building as a family unit, essentially.
As a family unit, but also it's not just confined to the unit, right? It's happening. So many of our decisions and thinking about money is not just happening at home. It's happening in the context of running businesses together and having very different scripts. That we started with roots and rigor, rigor and flow, roots and rigor and flow, roots and rigor and flow, rigor and flow.
One.
If you had to sum up the core thing you were taught about money growing up, what would it have been in your earliest years?
It boils down to one Bible verse that we heard over and over again, which is the love of money is the root of all evil. And that is what was drilled into my head.
Really? So how did that shape your relationship to money? Did you just have a very negative association with it, or?
I think that I was very avoidant of anything sort of money related. It was almost like, you know that money is important. You can see how important it is because growing up, our lights would get cut off. The gas would get cut off. So it was like, well, our gas and our electric is getting cut off because we don't have money to pay for it. Yeah. Therefore, money is important. Yeah. So I knew that it was important, but I also had this other messaging that said that, you know, heaven is our home. We're going to go to heaven where the streets are paved with gold. And when you live on earth, you're to be in this world, but not of this world. And there was another verse that you cannot serve God and money at the same time. You must pick which master you will serve.
Oh, wow.
And of course, you're going to pick God because you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And so then you're kind of at odds with money because you both need it and know its power and its impact. Yeah. But also you're at odds with it because it's this earthly thing and you're seeking heavenly things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting because I suppose I came into your life much later, and if I had to think about what conditioning you had around money, I'm not going to lie, I would not have thought that was your core conditioning.
Of course. Lots of work has been done. Over the years.
So yeah, tell me how, like, I've always seen you as someone who's very entrepreneurial. I want to earn money. I want to build generational wealth. We don't know for what generation that's going to follow us yet, but
hey, look, I've got a godson and 2 goddaughters.
That's true. I was thinking about our last conversation about fertility and kids and us being like, we may not have kids, so therefore we will just leave our money to some good cause or something. I don't know, but yes, you're right. Godson. So where did that shift for you?
Yeah, I would say that there were 3 main things that really started to reshape how I think about money. I would say the first, or at least one of the things, was my introduction to the prosperity gospel. I know that sounds crazy because it has a really bad rep.
What is prosperity gospel?
So basically, there's a brand of, I guess, evangelical or Pentecostal Christianity where these big pastors with massive mega churches preached a type of Christianity or a gospel that focused on getting your wealth here on earth, not just in the by and by in heaven, right?
Yeah.
And so their focus was on, you need to live a good life here to show the world what your God is capable of. You should live well.
Yeah.
You should live big.
Yeah.
And they lived big. I mean, a lot of these pastors had private jets, mansions, Bentleys, Rolls Royces, millions of pounds in investment, massive mega church, beautiful mega churches with thousands of members. You know, these guys were living large. It was about
Funded
prosperity.
by their congregants, I presume.
Their congregants and the myriad of books that they wrote and the TV channels that they
Earned money through.
and earned money through
Yeah.
the advertising on. Some of the biggest names in that branch of Christianity are people like Benny Hinn.
Yeah.
He's probably the most famous one. He's the one with the white suit and the mullet. And
Okay.
he takes his white blazer off and he goes, "Yeah!" And then everyone falls back. They're just like,
because they're
The
so in
spirit.
awe of his spirit, his
Yeah.
jacket. I mean,
well, the jacket
his
was giving fire.
money
he had
and
some
power.
nice jackets.
Okay,
he had
okay.
some nice jackets.
All right.
But I think it was more the power of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
You know, throwing them back. So that was Benny Hinn.
So let me understand the prosperity gospel thing. So you said it was to show your God what you're capable of, but
To show
was
the world.
Oh,
that
what's
you're
your
not
God?
poor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not like if you're a good person, God blesses you with all these
No,
riches.
that's also a part of it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with it, is that it hinges on the blessings of God.
Okay.
And God has blessed you.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if you don't have money, then
Yeah.
you don't have faith.
Okay. So it's a way to make you bad for being poor.
Precisely.
As well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather than this
sinful.
pastor is taking the church's money and that's how he got his wealth, as opposed to you're working a job that pays you a certain amount and that's okay, you know?
That is a wild level of mixed messages
It
to get,
is.
because basically it sounds like you got told, right, the love of money is the root of all evil. And then you got this other message that if you don't have money, there must be something you've done wrong. So
Absolutely.
you're damned if you had it and you're damned if you didn't have it.
Precisely.
As well, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you reconcile that?
So within the prosperity gospel, one of the things that at least the pastors I was around would say is that the key word in that Bible verse, the love of money is the root of all evil, is that it's the love part. Those who love money above God are the people who are going to have problems with money. Because, you know, love is a powerful word, right? If you love someone, you do anything for them. You'll even sacrifice your life for them.
Yeah.
You'll give up all your material wealth for that person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to love money to that extent is sinful.
So it's about greed.
It's about greed.
Rather than the money itself.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to like money is good. To want to have more of the money, to do more things is good. And so what that gospel weirdly helped me to do was to disentangle myself from this sort of money is evil and bad into money can do great things for you. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have it and then wanting to do the things that you need to do, i.e. further the kingdom of God, for example, which is what those pastors said that they were doing with their money.
Right. So in a way, it helped you. It didn't take you into an extreme swinging. It helped you to find a balance between these two ideas?
To some degree, I would say. I think that the dark side for me with the prosperity gospel is that with a lot of these pastors, they're preaching that you should get this money largely to give it to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that for me is the downside of it.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a bit of a unbalanced situation.
And presumably there's huge scope for financial abuse in that kind of context.
Loads.
Right?
I saw it happen firsthand. I got some horror stories from that time.
Yeah.
And no doubt we'll go into that at some point.
Okay, awesome. So you kind of had these two different things
others.
in the church.
Yes.
And then when you came out of the church, are those the ones that you've kind of kept, or have you had any other things that have influenced your thoughts on money?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the other thing was starting a business because it's impossible to be anti-money and be profitable. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
As a business owner, you've got to not only charge for your services, but you have to charge a profit margin on top of that in order to ensure you've got money in the business to do other things with the money, right?
Yeah.
So that taught me a lot. And there were a lot of books that I read and obviously trial and error. When you don't charge enough, suddenly you're working for 10p an hour.
Yep.
And that doesn't feel good.
We know that life. Yeah.
Exactly. So then you have to sort of really rethink your relationship to money and how you think about it. And I think the second thing, or the third in the overall, was watching Black business people and in the investment space doing incredible things fearlessly.
Yeah.
Like just unapologetically, I make money, I do great things with my money, I've got nice things, so what? It's what we do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think seeing that was very inspiring.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people like Eric Collins, for example, it was good to see that.
Yeah, so Eric Collins, he's an interesting guy. I first learned about him through you. I mean, I know he's quite a big deal anyway. So Eric Collins is the CEO of Impact X, which is a VC investment firm. And I guess I don't know him well in the way that you did. I know you did his podcast, but I did recently meet him with you. And I found him a fascinating guy. And he's written this book as well about, what is the book title called? It was called We Don't Need Permission. I've actually got it. And it's about how Black business can change our world. And one of the things that I found super interesting in chapter 2, he talks about how as Black people, we need to see money as a tool. So, you know, as a tool that can help to emancipate us. Now, I know we're not going to get into all the critiques of that because you could talk a lot about the critiques of that. I'm thinking about people I know who might listen and be like, hold on a second. Yes, we know that will be a future thing. Yep. But it is really, really interesting because in the second chapter, he talks about how we need to engage in these continuous acts of disruption in order to make the system work for us. And one of the examples he gives is one of your heroes that I know, which is the example of Berry Gordy, who set up Motown Records, and how he had the same struggles many Black people and many Black businesses have, which is he tried to get loans to set up his businesses and never could. But he had spotted this market inefficiency, which is that the music industry was white-led and just completely failing to see or look at Black talent. And so his proposition was, I'm going to create this independent label that's going to make top hits out of talent that's been overlooked, not even given a chance, obviously by white systems. Black people knew those artists.
They've been knowing.
And because he couldn't get the funding, what he did was come up with this offer to his friends for $800. Oh, not friends, it was his family specifically, that they had to approve this loan so that he could build the label. And eventually that label went on to become the sound of young America, essentially.
Absolutely.
So I find that I really like the idea that he is someone who's out there giving us as Black people a different narrative on how
Yes.
we can think about money, because it's challenged me, actually. I exist in a world where everyone's like, let's start a cooperative and let's do this. And I'm like, I do get that, but those are not foolproof things.
No.
So I can see how he would have had like
That
a
part.
profound influence on your life. Like if I had come across him younger than I am now, I think he would have had quite a profound impact on my way of seeing money.
Absolutely. I think with Eric Collins, it was interesting because I didn't really understand what he did, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But what I liked about him was his energy,
Yeah.
his optimism.
Yeah.
And I knew that he was a very powerful, very skilled man. That much I knew. And how I knew it.
Did he remind you of your pastors in that sense?
No, do you know what? In a way, but not the negative side. Just more like you've got this impressive guy. He was like 6 foot something.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
I've only met him on a video call.
Oh,
I did
no.
not know he was that tall.
Eric Collins is a solid guy. You know what I mean? He's very impressive. He's
Okay.
powerfully built.
Stature.
Yeah, he's got
Gravitas.
solid muscles, and he went to shake my hand, and I just really had to style it out and just be like, yes, I can handle this handshake. It was very,
Did he
very
nearly
solid.
break you?
Oh God! And then I went to hug him, and you could just feel the muscles. So this is a powerful guy.
Yeah.
A powerful black man who is in this space doing these things and talking about these terms, these money terms that I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed, you know.
Yeah.
So impressed.
So what age were you when you met him then?
I was 37, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
37 it takes to meet someone like that.
I can't even work it out. When did I first meet him? Let's just round it out and let's just say 36.
36, somewhere in the middle.
Let's just say
meet
36.
in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, it was interesting because at that point I'd been running my business. I had learned a lot of money principles around, budgeting and pricing and all of that good stuff. Meeting him was a whole different level because now this guy's in the investment space.
Yeah.
He was using all sorts of terms that I didn't understand, like VC, funding. His house was beautiful. His house was packed with he has one of the most extensive collections of black art from black artists, like some incredible pieces. So he's an art lover as well. And then he's this powerful businessman.
And he invests in the creative industries as well,
Hugely.
which is also huge for us
Yeah.
for our community, right?
Absolutely.
Where we're less represented. And then you
Absolutely.
see a funder at that level. It's like, I imagine that it might have been quite paradigm shifting.
I think, yeah,
and
it was.
hope-inducing in a way.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. Even though I didn't quite understand it, it took me some time to understand it. Obviously, in the last year, we've been on a bit of an investment thing with our companies. And suddenly some of the things that he used to mention and talk about started to make sense.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful that I met him when I did.
Yeah.
And that I was able to see and be inspired by his work and the way he looks at finances and money.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. I am curious because we went into the church and some of those scripts, but we never really talked about your family per se. So before we get into where and how our scripts collide and how that's shown up in our relationship, I feel like that's also important because it's come up a fair bit between us. So what was it like in your family? Obviously, you've spoken a lot about being working class and whatever before, but what messaging did you get from home?
It was, again, a little bit of a mixed message for me. My mum was a cleaner in Southeast London. It was tough. There's no two ways about it. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we didn't have enough money for the electric or for the gas. Things would get cut off. Sometimes it'd be like my mum trying to work out what we were going to eat and stuff like that. But also one thing I did know about my mum was that despite what we were going through financially and despite the messaging of the church, I noticed that she still had aspirations to be more, to be better, to have nice things. I remember, obviously, we couldn't afford for a tradesman to come to the house. And give us nice tiles on the floor like she'd seen in other people's houses because she cleaned nice homes.
Yeah.
You know, she was up on Maze Hill cleaning for the Barclays, who were the descendants of the people who founded Barclays
Bank.
Yeah, Barclays Bank, PLC, you know?
Yeah.
But what she did was she'd take me to Homebase on a weekend and she'd buy these tiles. They were kind of like a lino tile. It wasn't like ceramic tiles.
Okay.
Right? Because that's what she could afford.
Yeah.
They had the adhesive backing. And we'd come home and we'd put the tiles down in the bathroom to make our home look nice.
Yeah.
The way she'd seen in those other houses.
Yeah.
It was cheap, but it made and what I liked about it was she really taught me about DIY, do it yourself. If you want something, there is a cheap and affordable way to do it at the level that you are at.
Yeah.
And I really respected that about
Yeah.
her. Whether it was painting the walls, she'd buy, you know, back then Magnolia was all the rage. You know, you got some Magnolia from Homebase, a big tub, and you painted the walls.
Yeah.
You know?
So she was quite proud and had like a sense of pride about how
Absolutely.
she wanted to feel. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a DIY aesthetic, like I'm going to do this myself,
Yeah.
regardless of what my bank balance is saying.
Yeah.
The only issue was that sometimes, I guess maybe the frustration, I can only imagine, of the harshness of our lives, when we did get something, it would almost be, it felt sometimes like feast or famine or boom and bust.
Yeah.
It'd be like, right, we've got money, we have to enjoy ourselves.
Okay, so
You know?
it wasn't that she was spending money you didn't have. It's just that if she got a little windfall, she would spend it immediately.
That's what it seemed like.
Okay.
I was only a young person, but that's what it seemed like. Because then we'd
Okay.
go from that back to no electric, no gas,
Okay.
for example.
Yeah.
So that's what it seemed like as a child. I'd have to ask her to know
Yeah.
what the details are. But that's certainly the impression I got. And I know that I carried that into my later life. So I must have been picking up something
Yeah.
because I kind of replicated that feast or famine, boom and bust. And it took a long time to undo that conditioning.
How did you undo it? Like, how did you become aware of it first?
I think, you know, when you've been in debt a few times,
Okay.
you start to think, I can't keep doing this. This is not how I want to live. It's a feeling. There's a psychological feeling of extreme stress when you're under that financial pressure that could break you. And I think it does break people.
Yeah.
And it gets to a point where you're like, I have to find a way to not do this again, to not have maxed out store cards, maxed out credit cards, maxed out overdraft, not sure where money's coming from. When I do get money, it sinks into the abyss that is my overdraft. And nothing, I'm never
stable.
out of the red.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Ooh, yeah, never out the red.
Yeah.
Is it?
That was my core messaging. And then it didn't help that I was in a church that also said, don't have jewelry. So we weren't allowed to wear jewelry. You weren't really allowed to wear nice things. Even wearing perfume was frowned upon. Like so many things were frowned upon that were acquired by money and were linked to being ostentatious in your displays of wealth. So it was frowned upon. So you become kind of, I don't know, like stripped of nice things and niceness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so how did you, I get what you're saying about becoming aware, because being in the red all the time suddenly impacts you. Obviously, I know that you don't have debt now. So I'm curious, like, at what point did you start undoing and unlearning that way of dealing with money?
It was a process. It really was a process that took a very, very, very long time and lots of ups and downs. Sometimes you'd make a bit of progress and then slide back down. So there were certain people whose books I read and programs that I followed.
Okay.
I would say two for me that really stood out was Dan Miller. In fact, he was one of the first podcasts I ever listened to back when you could download podcasts on iTunes. And he had 2 shows, or was it 2 books? But certainly a show that was more like 48 Days to the Work You Love.
Okay.
And then the other book was No More Mondays. And what he taught you in those books was how to get out of the 9-to-5 grind.
Okay.
Because back in my 20s and I guess early-ish 30s, I was on the 9-to-5 grind. I mean, I was a teacher, and before that I had loads of other jobs. And I knew that I wanted to be in business full-time. That much I knew. And so he taught you how to essentially have what we now call side hustles on your way to getting out of the grind. And then the other person was Dave Ramsey, who had a really good method, the snowball method, for getting out of debt. And that's where you pay off, well, there's a few ways you can do it. You either start with the smallest debt and just get it paid off. And then you get a sense of like accomplishment.
Achievement,
I've done that. So let me do the next biggest and then the next biggest and so on. Or you start with the one with the highest interest and so on. Either way, I managed to use that method to get rid of debt. So then I had a bit of an ingrained, almost like a muscle memory of how to manage debt.
And a good feeling, presumably, really about feeling. Like, oh, I have agency over this thing. Like it doesn't have to control me. I can shift this pattern.
Absolutely, which is really, really important for me. Now, like I said, I did regress. I would say that it's probably in the last 6-7 years, I would say, where I've been consistently out of debt, save for my student loan, but consistently out of debt. Student loans are different in the UK, by the way. It's not like America. We don't get thrown in jail or...
American systems of student loans are next level.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But solidly financially stable with savings and steady, all of the things that you want as an adult, right? I've just really immersed myself in the world of finance in order to understand this thing that I had so many mixed messages about.
It's pretty amazing that you took it upon yourself to do all that learning. And I've got to say, you've shared some things. Like I remember you once talking to me about, well, multiple times talking to me about Profit First.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because in a way, I would say, if you don't mind,
go ahead.
That in many ways you inherited like a much more objectively unhealthy set of scripts, or templates around money than maybe I did. But in some ways, you've done so much more work on it because of that I just haven't. Like I feel a resistance to be like, what, I'm now going to read Ramit Sethi, but I actually need to read that stuff. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I think my thing was, if I can wake up back then at 5:30 in the morning and practice the guitar for 2 hours in order to be a better musician and play in the bands that I want to play in and play on the songs I want to play on, why wouldn't I do the same thing for money in order to be better at money and have more of it, which enables me to do more stuff with music and the other things that I love. That was my sort of...
Your mindset
my
switch.
My mindset switch, yeah.
Very good growth mindset.
Growth mindset, 10x.
I'm sure there's a psychologist out there who'd love to study how you used your creativity to ultimately motivate you to get out of debt so you had more time.
Buy my course, it's out next month.
We need to now start that. What is it called? Diversifying our revenue streams?
Absolutely. Let's get on to you.
Okay.
So tell me about your money scripts. I have some inklings.
Okay.
Some little bits of
Well, we've had to work through quite a lot when it comes to money. I have to say, I'm really glad you did all your learning before you met me, because I had a script that meant that if we were still in the figuring out debt phase, it would have just not worked.
It would have been a shit show. Let's just call a spade a spade.
Yeah, it couldn't have run. But my money scripts were different. I think, we had very, very different experiences and upbringings. And I have to say that relative to you, I was extremely privileged in terms of money, class, material wealth. I definitely wasn't as privileged as some people I know, but I know that I never had to worry about the power being turned off. I never had to worry about food to eat. So in that regard, I had a very, very stable upbringing in Southern Africa. And then actually money issues became much more apparent when I moved to the UK. And that's because currency exchange from Botswana to UK is always going to be...
Africa will let you know.
Hard to take. Even with a relatively strong currency like the Pula in Botswana, right? But anyway...
Africa will let you know.
It will let you know.
That your money...
I think it's the West will let you know that we don't like your money.
I like that reframing. I do like that reframing. I stand corrected.
That is not the currency of the world.
No.
It is not US dollars or Great British pounds.
No.
But yeah, anyway, my early life was pretty comfortable. My parents, they were kind of interested. So my dad was a teacher. So that's actually not like a massive salary, but it was comfortable. And our education was sorted because the school that he worked for meant we got free tuition in a really good school. So if you were a teacher, your child went for free.
That's amazing.
I'm pretty sure that was the arrangement. And that obviously saved the household quite a lot of money because it was a private school in Southern Africa. And then my mum, I would say, is very hardworking and entrepreneurial, but not necessarily business focused or at all good with money, I would say. Okay. Not terrible either, but she doesn't, even today, she runs a farm and she sells products. And I don't think they ever sit there and figure out what does it cost to create this product, and therefore what's the markup. They just charge like what they think. Which is well below market value.
I was going to say, is it even based roughly on the market value in the shops? I don't know.
Absolutely. Maybe roughly on the shops. They'll charge, we think this product is better than what they get in the shop, so we'll charge this. But it's not accounting for the fact that this is hand grown on a farm. Like if it was here, you'd find it in Whole Foods or Borough Market
Holland
for
and Barrett.
Stupid amount of money. But anyway, that's a side note.
The Nigerian in me now wants to do import-export.
Import-export. You can come and save my family from its madness.
Listen, your mum's honey is nice.
She should be exporting that for a good amount of money, or just selling it in Botswana for a good amount of money. Anyway, my point is, she actually ran an NGO. She spent a lot of my childhood studying for her PhD, which she eventually got in her 50s. So I say all that to say, things were comfortable, but in actual fact, my parents weren't particularly business minded. They were sort of smart with the money that my dad inherited because he came from a relatively wealthy family. It was just that it was split between 4 kids. So, but they were smart with that money. They invested it. He inherited shares. They used it to buy a second home. They rented it out, and they paid for our school fees and to send us to school in the UK through that before the 2008 crash kind of changed everything. It was weird because as much as we were comfortable, my parents definitely had a very frugal mindset. They were absolutely anti-debt. It wasn't like they vocally shoved it down your throat, but I knew that. I could feel it in everything. They never took on debt. They never spent beyond their means. If you wanted something at home, they didn't spoil us with things necessarily. We didn't want for anything, but they definitely didn't buy us loads of toys or whatever. If they bought us stuff and they spent on us, which they really did, it was on our education. Everything was about education and experiences. So they would use any spare money for holidays, for travel, and because they wanted us to have like this well-rounded picture of the world. And my dad was a geographer, my mum was an environmentalist. They loved to see everywhere. So I was really very privileged in that regard.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, it is. But it also, they were all about the values. They were very critical, even if in subtle ways, of people being materialistic. When we got to the point in Botswana where they started importing cars and people, the country shifted quite a lot from being a country where most people were very humble and whatever, and people started buying Mercedes Benzes and BMWs. They were always just like, this is just ostentatious wealth, and they did not like it, and they made it very clear that they didn't like it.
Why do you think they didn't like it though? What was the problem for them? Because I know for us, it was just, it's sinful. That was our thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, probably there might be some theologies from their backgrounds rooted in it, but it didn't express itself as that. It did express itself as values and what matters most. And that was things like your character as a person matters, who you are matters, how you treat people matters. They were, in some senses, working people in the sense that they were like, you go and you get a good job. But because my dad came from some wealth in his background, there was also this kind of weird upper middle class way my education played out with private schools and being in spaces where actually I saw some very wealthy people who had a very different kind of wealth and a very different attitude to money and materialism. And I think another factor, my dad was born in 1939. He was evacuated in the Second World War in Britain, out of London. And so a lot of his early core years, despite coming from a wealthy family, were marked by extreme rationing. That wealth couldn't be deployed in the ways it probably would have had he been born, even 20 years earlier or maybe 20 years later. And so in some ways, his early childhood had a humbleness to it. His parents weren't excessive spenders. They raised him the way they raised us. Experiences, travel, not flashy people. Okay, so my mum, that's where things are entirely different. You know, she grew up as one of 14 kids, well below the breadline, in a small rural village in Botswana, in a place called Shoshong. And, you know, they had no water, they had no electricity, they had very little money. Childcare was communal, so my mum was sent to live with relatives at a certain age. Her father worked in the mines in South Africa during the apartheid years, which was, by all accounts, a horrific way to work, a horrific way of being. You know, her PhD, my mum's PhD, was on how you can support subsistence farmers to feed their own livestock during drought years in Botswana, which is a desert. It's the Kalahari Desert. And, you know, she doesn't say it explicitly, but when I look at her and I look at her story, I'm quite sure she came to that topic out of trauma. You know, they had huge amounts of food insecurity to navigate. They didn't know when they would eat. And so keeping your livestock alive in those drought years was critical to your survival. So I think a lot of that was her probably consciously or unconsciously processing some of those very difficult years as a child and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that frugality came from there. And one thing I'll say is, no matter how much comfort my mum had with her own job and through a marriage to my father, she has never, ever stopped worrying about money. Her preoccupation...
It scars you.
Yeah, you don't get over that trauma.
That survival mode, one thing I will say is that survival mode stays with you.
Yeah.
I feel like I earn decent, I've got a good business, all of these things. You've seen it with me.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
that
very
survival
much,
thing. It's like, I've got to keep going because you're like trying to outrun the demons of poverty.
Yeah.
You know, obviously
totally.
It wasn't as severe as what your mum went through, but I can relate. It's like you're pursued by this thing.
I mean, I think they're relatable. I think urban poverty in a place like Great Britain looks different to rural poverty somewhere like Africa.
Of course.
But the psychology and what it does to you, I
same.
can't imagine they're too different.
Yeah.
You know, you have to worry where your next meal is coming from.
Yeah.
You may not have access to sanitation or lights or to do your homework. There are barriers just to get the things you need in terms of education. In my mum's case, as a route out. She did make it out. Obviously, she got to a PhD, but you know, that wasn't my experience. You know, she walked 10 and 20 kilometers to and from school each day after working in the fields for her food, you know, for the family's food.
Yeah,
so
it's a lot.
That conditioning was present in my childhood through her.
Right.
And making me very aware about money.
Right.
And obviously I saw one half of a family who had very, very little on my mum's side.
Yes.
And then my dad's side, where there was really quite a lot of comfort and ease.
Yeah.
I was very attuned to and aware of those things from very young.
Yeah, because you straddle the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also it's just the way my mind works as well, you know. I think you could see it like class differences playing alongside racial differences within my family so strongly, you know.
So we've talked a little bit about your parents' scripts around money and the reasons for those scripts. And obviously you will have taken that in subconsciously, as kids do, right?
Yeah.
How did that play out for you then in terms of your life, I guess, as a kid? What do you remember about your relationship to money and how you interacted with money?
You know, I have to be honest, you can have a pretty good sense that you're privileged because you didn't really have to worry about money. And I think for my first 11 years before I left home, that was the case. It wasn't that I didn't think about money, but I didn't worry about it. What I mean by that is, I know if I asked my parents for something, I wasn't necessarily going to get it. And usually my parents would build in, you get something as a reward. So if I wanted books or I was into art and I liked colouring or creating, it would be, you need to do well at school this term and then you'll get that thing. Or maybe if you do X, Y, and Z, they would always do this. Actually, it was a really good training because what they were doing was delayed gratification. They didn't just instantly give you stuff. It was like you must work to get something. And that was great. And again, this is a sign of some degree of comfort that we had. But some of the earliest things I remember thinking about with money were things like pocket money. So my parents would give us 10 pula per week, which was probably in those days about the equivalent of £1, just under £1.
And pula is
the currency in Botswana, yeah. I suppose I learned something about myself even with that, because my brother and I got the exact same amounts and we got given it once a week. And the one thing that was always like a running commentary / joke in our family was, you give the kids money, Alistair, my brother, he spends it immediately. Like the guy just, he's funny because he's a bit more like you with money and his habits, but he would just immediately spend it.
We like nice things.
I don't even think it was nice things. It was like chappies, which are like these little sweets, chewing gum that you buy back home. I suppose that's true.
Sweets, chocolate, that's nice for a kid. And then as you get older, it turns into cars and jewelry.
You're not wrong. In the mind of a kid, that is nice things. Whereas like for me, my parents were like, you give her money, she doesn't spend it, she just saves. So I would always say to my parents, yeah, you know that building society bank account you opened for me, please put my 10 pula in there. So I only cashed in on that money at age 19, when I left school, moved to London and went for a year's music training course for maybe people don't know this about me, but I was a singer. So I went to vocal school. And at that point, I also learned keyboard, and I used that money to buy my first ever stage piano to learn the keyboard.
How long did it take you to save up that amount for that key? Because that's an 88 key weighted keyboard.
It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought by far.
How long did it take you to save that up? Because you're talking saving up pocket money.
I mean, I didn't know why I was saving it up for. I started saving at like, I don't know, 5 or 6, whatever age, 7. I don't know what age they started giving that money, but up until that age, so it had just been sitting in that account. And I was like, now I have something I want to spend. Like, it's a stupid long time.
That is crazy.
And I had no plan for that money. Just, I'll use it when I'm older, because I had a fantasy that it would be worth loads of money at that point, which obviously it wasn't. But it was to me.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I thought I'd be a millionaire, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. Yeah. And I don't even know where I got that idea, if I'm completely honest. But I guess I learned that about myself. I'm a little bit different from you in some ways in my approach to money. I think when you think about money as an entrepreneur, you think of yourself as a business owner. But even though I didn't have a term from it from a young age, I think I thought about everything as a social enterprise. So one of the other things I learned about myself really young, I went to these, as I said, like really quite nice schools, private schools in Africa. And one of the things they always made us do in those schools, they had very strong values-based ethoses, and they made everybody do a community service one day a week. And I remember that one of the things that happened in primary school was that we went to a trip to our local SOS Children's Village. And the SOS Children's Village was a place that provided support to kids who, for one reason or other, were neglected. Maybe they were orphans because their parents had passed away from HIV or AIDS. It could have been that they had disabilities, and we didn't have the social system to necessarily care for them. So this place did it. And I remember being so moved by that experience of going there that when we then went back to school, it was like, okay, we have to do something to raise money because they're telling us that they are sustained by donations. And I actually set up my first business using pocket money. That was the one time I spent it, to buy stamps and card with friends who also brought money from their parents. I guess it was their pocket money. And we bought stamps and cards and ink, and we set up a card business. We made greetings cards.
I love that.
And Christmas cards, and decided to sell them alongside cakes at our school cake sale. It was really silly, but we called ourselves Stampus, Incus and Cardinus.
As you do.
As you did. And we made these cards on play dates. But what I always remember learning early on, it was a bit like that delayed gratification message that I had been taught by my parents subtly, was like, oh, so we buy these materials to be fair, I wasn't yet making a profit, but you buy these materials, you make the card, you sell it for a profit, and in the end you have more money than you started with. So now you can go and buy more materials, and this time it's cheaper because you already have the stamp and the ink. You just need the card. And now we can make more and more money for these kids. So you did it several times over, and then we donated the profits, which was not a good business decision. No, we didn't donate the profits. We donated all of the money.
So now you had nothing.
So we now had nothing. So the business died. So the first early lesson. But the
it's
point
your first
is,
social enterprise,
in a sense.
Yeah.
And for me, the motivator was an issue socially that I wanted to solve, more than a desire to make money. But obviously now I know you need to make that money and you need to be sustainable. But I didn't know that then. But yeah, I guess that was an important thing I recognized.
Okay, so you left home at what age?
Yeah, 11 in 97, yeah.
Okay, to the UK.
Yeah.
And did your relationship to money change at all? Because now you're a kid out in the wild, caring for yourself. Obviously, your parents would have sent you money, but you're largely on your own.
I mean, yes, it changed dramatically. I mean, saying I was on my own is a bit unfair. Like in the sense to my parents looked after me. I feel like I should say that in case people think like, what do you mean?
But they weren't there though.
They weren't with me. Yeah, that's true. And so I was sent to live with family. I think we spoke about this on a previous episode. That didn't work out for a whole bunch of reasons. But either way, regardless, one of the things, and in fact, one of the bones of contention and arguments between my family at the time was my family in Northern Ireland felt that the money that I was given should be given to them to disperse to me in stages and for them to have some sort of oversight with. And my parents were like, no, she's absolutely fine. She's got pocket money. She can manage her money. She'll be fine.
I love that.
I love it too, in a way. But I think as I see it, I think my family member was a social worker, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, that would have been alarm bells for them because that's parentifying a child in their eyes, right? Now, my parents would have had totally different opinions because they were made very responsible at very young ages. But so again, there was some cultural clashes playing out there about what can a child be competent and ready for or whatever. I actually was good with money. So as it happens, my relationship with money changed to the sense that I now had to budget. Which is a very different thing to, do I save my pocket money? I now had to go, okay, you have £100 per term, which is what my allowance was. And with that £100 per term, which in my parents' eyes was a lot of money because they were earning in back home's currency, right? I've got £100, which I need to stretch over 3.5 months. And I need to use that. Of course, my food and my shelter was paid for. Yeah. But I have to use that to think about my toiletries, any stationery. Of course, there's a whole economy that happens between peers at school where other kids come in with money to go and buy sweets at a tuck shop or at the petrol station or crisps or to just go into town and get a KFC. So actually, there's a certain level of pressure that comes with that in the sense that to stay with your peer group, there's an expectation that you spend. And the money I had didn't account for enough for those basic peer activities alongside the toiletries, the stationery. That actually was a very difficult budgeting exercise for an 11-year-old because you had to figure out what to do when. And I just had the opinion that money was what it was. You can't go back to your parents and ask for more. It's your job to manage it. The other thing I would add to this is that after I left Northern Ireland, where I had many more working class peers, I got a scholarship at a private school in England. And the peer group...
What school?
It was a school called Malvern Girls College. It was...
quite
very affluent people were in that school.
Some very notable names.
Nigerian oil princesses. It wasn't just white peers. It was kids from all over the globe who came from very wealthy families. And that was when I realized my comfort is very different to this level. These are people whose parents aren't teachers and NGO workers. They are bankers. They own major construction firms, and those would be the ones who came into money rather than, new money rather than old inherited money. There's a lot of old inherited money. They are heads of people in Heinz, like big global corporates and, you know, things like that. And yeah, that's when I realized, like, okay, I just live in a different world with money with these people. I cannot even try to compete on this peer group thing. I just need to manage my money, buy my stationery, buy my toiletries, buy my train ticket to and from whatever city I need to go to. When it's a weekend, we're not allowed to stay at school, and get on with it. And develops an attitude of work hard and you'll be able to have what they have. It doesn't actually work like that. But
it really doesn't.
That's what I thought.
It really does not. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, that would have been a massive shock to the system, to go from the frugality of your parents to the working class environment of Belfast at that time in the 90s to this world of upper middle class, if not aristocratic wealth in Middle England.
It was wild. And I would have to say Belfast was a bit more mixed than that. There were working class and middle class kids. It was a state school, but a state grammar. And you saw those class differences play out. But they were all very different and stark experiences that.
But what I like is that in a way you got quite a broad spectrum of what wealth is, what it can be, and the disparities between those who have and those who don't have. Like, you were able to see that whole range, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I literally just grew up in that one world, that Southeast London, working class, borderline poverty world.
Yeah.
And that was it. And so I didn't even know that certain things even existed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's a privilege to that exposure too. I mean, and it was never more stark than in my family of origin, I have to say, because that really was below the breadline poverty in Africa to upper middle class wealth in England.
So we both have our various scripts that we've learned about money, our conditioning about money. And we've interpreted that in our own way and sort of formed our own path. And then we've come together in...
Holy matrimony.
Holy matrimony, dare I say.
And not holy as it happens. The church didn't want us, but anyway.
No, they didn't. And so we've had to work out what our script is.
Yeah.
Rather than our individual. Because now you're in a world where you're living together, you're paying bills, you're paying rent. But even then, even on the more subtle things, like, what is our financial future? How are we planning for our future? What does that look like?
Yeah.
What is good financial planning for you versus what good financial planning is for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're having to do all of these things. So I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, from your perspective, how has money shown up, like money scripts shown up for you in our relationship?
I mean, I think the most obvious one is you're someone who is very comfortable doing two things that I was less experienced at. Speculating to accumulate. You're very willing to spend money on the business, on things. Probably were more excited about investing and let's go and get money. To begin with, I would say we've met in the middle now, but let's go out and get VC investment and let's get 10x returns as a minimum and then let's build to sell. And So like, you're very enamored by all of that. Maybe that prosperity gospel creeps its way into business.
It's just the rough and tumble of business.
But even before we knew about investment, I think it was just in the day-to-day spending on the business.
Yeah.
You are willing to speculate to accumulate, which I respect, actually, because you have to. So that's one thing. But also because of the amount of learning that you've done, I would say you're much more informed about things like investing. And you invest... Actually, we both take a similar amount of risk in how we think about investment. But you will look at new things. You'll look at things that I might just be like, oh, I don't understand Bitcoin. Or, you'll be like, let's look at the S&P 500.
Yep, S&P 500.
Tech fund. And I'm like, what is that? Like, I just haven't even looked, right?
Yeah.
I do know now, but I didn't when I met you, right? Whereas me, I'm the person that's like, well, why aren't we saving? Have we saved? And won't necessarily think that is not the best way to make your money work for you, So I'm just much more cautious, I would say, with money. And I think we balance each other out a bit of yin and yang in that regard. I'll be like, no, let's build a lifestyle business. I've come, again, we've met in the middle on these things, but I'm like, why would we go out and seek investment when we haven't proven the concept first? We should get existing clients. We should, all of these kinds of things. So that's how it shows up to me. How do you agree with that? Or
I would agree with that. However, one thing I would say is that when I first met you, I got the impression of frugality. Someone who's frugal, only spends what's absolutely needed on certain things, only to discover over time.
Are you saying I'm like my parents?
Do you know what?
What a shock.
What a shock. It turns out the apple does not fall far from the tree.
Anyway, what is it you were about to say you found out?
So I discovered that the frugality was an aspect of you rather than all of you, and that you're just as bougie as I am, and you like nice things just as much as I do.
I'm not going to lie, I do. I do. So, I like art. I like beauty, and that influences lots of things. Like I like fashion, or I would like my home to look a certain way, or and you kind of need money for those things.
Yeah, and I think you gave yourself permission to like those things. I think I've had to teach myself to enjoy life.
Yeah.
And that life is for living.
Yeah.
And that it's okay to have some nice things. It's okay to, not always constantly be in survival mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I have been like just trying to find balance.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be that I would even have holes in things and not replace them.
Yeah.
You maybe even saw some of that in the early stages of our relationship,
Now you wear it about 3 times and you're like, this looks like it needs to go to charity. I'm like, you spent a fair bit of money on that and it looks perfectly fine to me. Also, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's just trying to find that balance. And it's always you kind of swing sometimes between the two. But I find the swings are not as wide.
Yeah.
That pendulum is not so far to the left,
not.
so far to the right.
Yeah, 100%.
But I think that as a couple, we are melding our financial literacy, our financial understanding, our financial planning.
Definitely. I feel like we've settled into a bit of a groove where I've learned stuff from you about profit and investing. Obviously, we've joined certain things up together in pursuit of, we want some stability for ourselves. We would, like to be able to have a house. I mean, many people, in generations gone by, not having a house in your 40s or late 30s would be preposterous, right?
Absolutely.
Like we need those things and we need like pathways to those things. And I think we've kind of got clear outlines for that. And also within the business, we've sought out the expertise of accountants, business planners, finance management people, people who've helped us think through, who've built and exited and sold massive businesses. So in that regard, we've been really lucky. We're learning constantly, even now, and building it with an awareness of what our own limitations are.
Absolutely. So for you, when you're thinking about us and maybe our part in the wider family that we're a part of, the wider community, what remains to be done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, speaking personally about us and our business stuff, I think we've taken loads of steps, and I think we basically need to keep seeking experts' advice and learning and just keep on the path we're on. Speaking more widely in terms of our community, I have to say that money has been a massive conversation in my field in recent years. And a lot of this was prompted by Black Lives Matter movement, funders that fund a lot of social good work that I'm involved with, suddenly tracing the origins of their endowment funds through slavery and all sorts of things, and realizing that, you're funding marginalized communities with essentially their own money that you've profited off over many, many generations, right? And it's been really, really fascinating seeing those conversations play out. I think as a Black community specifically, we've got a lot to learn and a lot of soul searching to do internally about money and how we build wealth. And I know loads of that is going on, whether people are taking like cooperative structures or whether they're taking much more capitalist VC kind of type approaches to that. I think there's really room for those conversations to come together. And I think one thing that profoundly influences my answer on this is not that long ago, I had the chance to work on a project which was around what's called participatory grant making. It's funders giving communities the space to take decisions about how funds should be spent, rather than a bunch of people who know nothing about the communities they're investing in making decisions on their behalf. And I was doing this project with an organisation called the Obele Initiative. It's one of the leading Black-led organisations in this country. They call themselves an infrastructure plus organisation because they support a load of Black organisations to do their work in the community. And when community members came to the point of having to decide how to spend money that they had been given by these grant funders to the tune of hundreds of thousands, people had a range of responses, you know. Some people were paralyzed. I don't think we should be spending this money. We haven't had enough time to think about it. We've been in this process, you know, of figuring out how to spend money and how to give money with each other for a year, maybe 18 months. And I still don't think it's enough time. Yet people who make decisions about funding do it over the course of one meeting without a second thought. And I was just like, what is going on here? We have never had that chance to deal with that kind of money. For other people, looking at that money raised all sorts of trauma in their family history, how their parents fought over money, and how there was just an anxiety that the conversation of money was even there. So going back to money is never just about money that we talked about at the beginning. Some people were like, well, we shouldn't spend this money. We should invest it so that we have our own in perpetuity fund, that we keep getting the returns on our own investment so we don't have to keep going back to these funders and asking for more money. There was such a range of responses rooted in so many different things. And like we've been talking about the scripts people inherited. And I thought, when have we even ever had the chance to have those conversations as a community?
I don't think really ever. Not with these large sums of money.
Yeah.
At all.
This is, new territory.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you talking about that, the psyche that underpins money in each person. What we sometimes forget is that there's also a collective psyche around money.
Yeah.
And when I think about, Black people, so African descended people, and I think about our history with money, going back, unfortunately, a lot of the brutality of the transatlantic slave trade. I know that we had a history before that and there were many wealthy African nations and kings and stuff like that. But just thinking about the impact of that, the impact of colonialism, and then the impact of all of these IMF loans and the way our countries have been destabilized, mostly because of the West, sometimes because our leaders have made really poor decisions, particularly now, our leaders are making really poor decisions. But I think that really affects the psyche of a people.
Yeah.
And so every time we have to think about money collectively, you're dealing with, like you said, the trauma and the thinking and the psyche of all of these individual people, which means that when decisions need to be made, it can be chaos.
Yeah,
and things
really
can grind to a halt.
Yeah.
Things done, not in the way that they should be done.
Yeah, and I think, that this is something we should delve into at some other point. But, I think there's a whole set of questions that could be done over this last few year period about how money has been, how attempts to shift power and wealth into the hands of our communities have actually played out in real time because of that. And, it's not just a fear of spending it. Sometimes it's the desire to coral and hoard.
Absolutely.
And to, put yourself in a position of power you've never had. I'm not referencing the project I referred to before. I'm talking about wider things I've seen or heard about in the sector. So I feel like there's a long way to go, and there's some really meaty conversations we need to be having as a community, which I'd love for us to have some role in curating.
I would love that. And it'd be good to bring in some of the leaders in that space and really talk through what's happening, what's happened historically, what they're trying to plan for the future, some of the obstacles and challenges. If that's a conversation that you would like to hear, definitely let us know.
Definitely.
And as always, you can reach us at rigorandflow@gmail.com. That's RIGOUR and AND flow@gmail.com. For any of your questions, we'll answer those in a subsequent episode. If you have any thoughts about the episode, any feedback, you want to contribute to the conversation, if there's something you think we should be talking about, definitely let us know. Because like we said, we're working out in the open and we're still figuring out what this show is going to be. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.